Welcome to this episode of the ThinkingSpot Coaching Podcast. My name's Krissi Carter, and it's a pleasure to invite Ayla Allen with me today. And the topic we're going to be talking about is the mixed race experience, growing up, the challenges, and the sense of belonging. So welcome, Ayla. How are you today?
Hello. I'm all right, thank you. How are you?
I'm really good, really good. And the reason why we're doing this podcast is because a couple of weeks ago, I was going to Ayla's art exhibition over in Leicester, and we started talking about us being mixed race and growing up in different countries and what that was like. And we thought, wow, this is going to be a brilliant episode because there are so many mixed race people out there who are probably feeling exactly the same as us, but perhaps haven't spoken about these things before. So we thought, right, we're going to create this podcast. We're going to let people listen to it and see what comes from it. So Ayla, I'm going to hand over to you. Tell us about your background.
My background.
What's your mix?
Well, my mix is Chinese Turkish.
Hey.
Which you know. So my mum's Chinese, my dad's Turkish, and I grew up in Essex. So I grew up in the early 80s in Essex, which I think was a slightly different time. I think we'll all agree, won't we? Slightly different time back then. Slightly different. I've got two older sisters. They grew up in the 70s, but I was an 80s baby. And I mean, yeah, I had a really good childhood. I went to lovely schools and all of that. And I always, I went to Catholic schools because my mum was very, very insistent on that. So lovely primary school, lovely secondary school. But in terms of being mixed race, I was always, one thing I would say was I was always extremely proud. And I think that probably came from my dad more so. I mean, my mum was always proud, but my dad was just very, very proud of being Turkish, very proud to be married to a Chinese lady who he thought was amazing, and just very proud to live in England. Just, you know, just like he really loved life. So yeah, really good childhood. But I did always feel, I was saying this to you the other day, I wasn't quite sure where I belonged. And I think probably my earliest experience was probably, I must have been very young. I must have been 4, 5, very, very young. Because I remember I was at gymnastics, and a girl that was a fair bit older, probably 4 or 5 years older, came over to me and said, "So where are you from?" And I said, "Oh, I'm from here." And she went, "No, where are you from?" I was like, and I remember panicking, thinking, right, I know my mum and dad said that I'm half Turkish, half Chinese, but I also have an English accent, and I hadn't really been.
Yeah, you had three different cultures, 3 different backgrounds, all
completely confused because mum and dad, I guess you don't at that age understand British.
Yeah.
So I just said to her, I'm half Chinese, half Turkish, and half English.
Oh, right.
Which at that point they started laughing, and it did make me feel a bit, I don't know, I wasn't upset, but I did feel a bit like I'm different. There was that slight, And she went, "So let me get this right. You're half Turkish, half Chinese, and half English." And I was like, yes. I thought, just go with it. If you're going to commit.
Because we can have half plus a half plus a half.
Plus a half equals a whole.
Why not? 1 and a half.
In hindsight, it was funny, but I committed to it. But yeah, again, and I would say it was, I was very lucky, and I used to be able to visit Malaysia a lot, which is where my mum's from, and I also got to visit Turkey. Now I look, contrary to how you see my hair at the moment, you know, I've got big curly hair, so I look quite Turkish, big curly hair. Krissi has many nicknames for me, which I
do. They're not appropriate for sharing on this podcast.
No, they're not, but they're very endearing because we're such close friends. But yeah, I never felt in Turkey I looked Turkish. So people would speak to me in Turkish, and I felt completely isolated because I couldn't speak it, unfortunately. So I couldn't really speak to friends, cousins, anything like that. And then, of course, over in Malaysia with all my Chinese family, who again are just amazing. They're very good at English, as you know, but obviously some of the older generation aunties and grandma couldn't speak to them, and obviously didn't look Chinese. So from there, they were like, "Where are you from?" So I never, and of course I also wasn't English. So as an adult, I love it. because I'm like, I get to embrace all of this, all of it, and it's wonderful. As a child, I have to say, I wasn't quite sure where I fitted in. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you because I can relate to that so much. So for our listeners who don't know, I'm originally from Hong Kong. I'm half Hong Kong Chinese and half English. Hong Kong was a British colony at the time. And so my dad's English and my mum's Hong Kong Chinese. And like you, I never quite knew where I fitted in. But because I lived in Hong Kong and because I was half Hong Kong Chinese, I think there wasn't so much, there wasn't as much difficulty as you would have had being in a completely different country, if you like, as well. So you've got your Turkish background, you've got your Chinese background, and then you've got your English. You're in England. So the difficulty that I had when I was growing up was that there was this clash of cultures, and there are some things that is acceptable in Chinese culture that isn't acceptable in Western or English culture. And what I found growing up in school, because I went to an English school, was that even though there was a hugely international population, it was more westernized. And so my friends would be able to do certain things that I wouldn't be allowed to do.
Okay.
Because Chinese culture, it's all about being very studious, working really hard. You have to get an A grade, or an A-star grade. Anything less than an A or an A-star grade, you're
Yeah.
with my friends, it was more about, oh, just relax, you'll get, as long as you're working hard, you'll get the grades that you can get, and just completely different. So I was so confused as to why I was working really, really hard with what people call a tiger mum. Yes. Now I'm so thankful for it because I was able to integrate, my education, my career, everything. But at the time, it just felt really unfair that my friends were going out playing and having sleepovers, and I wasn't allowed to have that because, hey, why
I didn't know that.
playing? You have to study, and fill up every single day, every single second of the day, studying for school or playing the piano or going ice skating or having extra maths and that sort of stuff. Like, I think for my childhood, my mum was to the extreme, but it's very much in the culture that education is respected, and you're very lucky to have an education, and therefore you're going to excel and you're going to do your best. As you
That's so interesting.
name and everything.
I didn't know that. Yeah. I didn't know that you, like, all these years I've known you, I didn't know that you didn't have sleepovers and that was restricted.
No,
I didn't know that.
Completely restricted. So eventually, when I was a teenager and a bit older, now this is the weird bit, because with Chinese culture, people go out eating like first thing in the morning, last thing at night. The restaurants are open until 4 o'clock in the morning over in Hong Kong. Not all of them, but some of them, like literally, you can go and eat whenever you want. And so I was allowed to go out until early hours of the morning when I was older, because in Chinese culture it's more okay. And even now, when you go out to Hong Kong, you'll see like 4-year-olds, they're still awake at midnight, walking the parks and things. It's just and so you just get so confused because you have to try and fit in and work out what's acceptable in this situation, but not this situation, and who you're talking to. So you have to be able to adapt and be flexible, which is actually a really good skill to have. But then you lose that sense of self and what your own values are, because you want to try and fit in, but actually you think these values aren't going to quite fit here, and they're not going to quite fit here. And it's not until you're an adult that you think, actually, no, this is who I am. It's going to be a mixture of both, and this is what I'm going to do. But it takes you to be an adult to be able to be confident enough to have
it
that.
really does. I agree with you. It takes a while to get there. But my mum was the same in some ways. I think with the sleepover and the letting me out, I think mum had given up by the third child. Yes, I think by that point she was like, she'll be fine. But I think it's interesting what you said about just the way they raise us. Now, mum is, as you've met my mum many times over, she's incredible and she's loving and she drops everything for you, and her grandchildren are everything. Her family is important. But what I always find interesting is the way they show their love, or the way my mum showed her love was get my children educated,
Yeah.
feed them,
Yeah.
make sure that they're clothed, and it's very practical. And my dad, which I think, honestly, when I look at my mother and father, they were a match made, I think, in heaven, because they are so different. My dad,
Yeah.
God bless him, as you know, he passed away 3 years ago. He you know, was born, he was Muslim, but I wouldn't say he wasn't a strong Muslim. He just loved everybody. He was one of those
Your
sort of,
dad spoke
he
like
did
every single language, and didn't he
every
have like
language.
Jesus and,
Oh, yes.
and
Dad's
all of the
religion
different
was,
religions, but everyone was all
that's
around him.
it. He was amazing. He
Yeah.
was. He was just like, your religion should be kind to everyone. It doesn't matter
Yeah.
whether you're here or somewhere in between, what color you are. And I loved that about him. And he was very, very, as you may or may not know, Turkish are very tactile. So he was, you couldn't leave the room, could you, Krissi, without getting a
No.
on the cheek.
Yeah.
Whereas my mum was the
Completely
polar
different.
opposite.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, why are
So
you
they
touching
met
me?
in the middle.
What do
Mum
you
was
want?
like, no need, no need for a cuddle. Where she's completely different now, because they just sort
Yeah.
of, I wouldn't say merged in the middle. Dad never let go of that, but Mum, she always says, your dad taught me how to be like this, and I love that. I love that he was, you know, just, he taught all the Chinese side, because when they went over there, they didn't know how to feel about my dad when they first met him, because Mum was the first, I think, the first in her entire family. There was 11 of them to bring anyone home that wasn't Chinese.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they, the first time, they were a bit cautious, but of course my dad just won them over.
Yeah.
That was it.
Kiss them to death.
Yes, kissed them to death. But
Oh,
yeah,
bless him.
you've reminded me of another. I don't think, like, where I grew up, also in Essex. So I grew up in sort of Raynham and Elm Park, and I do remember a girl saying to me once, and I don't think it's racism or horridness or anything like that. I almost think back there it was just a bit uneducated, just the unknown. So again, in a big group, and there's only very few times I felt different, but she was in a big group and she just went to me, so where do you go on holiday? Something, China? Is that where you go? I know. And I just laughed because everybody else laughed. I didn't know what to say. But I genuinely don't think this girl was being mean. I just think it was, but again, it was just one of those sort of memories in my head where I thought, oh yeah, that made me feel for the first time quite different.
Yeah.
And that I wasn't. So I just laughed and said, no, I've never been there.
Yeah.
That was it.
As a child, I loved being able to speak both languages. I can speak Cantonese, I speak English. So I was able to communicate with anyone. And I used to quite like that, because I didn't look fully Chinese. When I did speak Cantonese, people go, whoa, how come you can speak Cantonese? That's so good. And I still get that now. And I love that element of surprise to people. It's like, hello, yes, I can speak Cantonese.
That's cool.
And my dad can speak Cantonese as well. And people are always surprised, even though he's been in Hong Kong way longer than he's been in the UK now. But there are challenges as well. So we've talked about, growing up and the challenges because we didn't know where we fit or where we belonged. And that sort of creeped into adulthood as well. And sometimes, like the example you've just given there, you get reminded by comments, throwaway comments that people make. Oh, do I actually belong here or do I not? And for me, growing up in Hong Kong, I grew up I went to an English school, hugely international population. I'd never encountered racism, really. It just wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I came to the UK, I went to Lancaster Uni, and then I lived in Liverpool for a bit after that for my teacher training, where we met, that I encountered racism, because all of a sudden I wasn't the person that looked a bit Caucasian or white. He ended up being the person who looks very Chinese. And then I would have random people on the street calling me the racist word for Chinese people
Oh my
And I was
gosh.
literally just walking down the street. Now that happened in, so I've lived in loads of places in the UK. That happened in Lancaster, loads. It happened in Liverpool, and it happened down in Brighton as well.
Right.
And that was the first time that I experienced racism. And
Mm.
then during my teaching career as well, if someone wasn't happy with something, then my background about me being Chinese or being Hong Kong, all of a sudden, that would be an issue.
Right.
Whereas when I was living in Hong Kong, never had that
Mm.
experience before. And it's not pleasant. It's
It
really not
isn't.
pleasant. But then you also get that, I don't know if you've experienced that, is that sometimes people don't realize that you're mixed race as well. And so they
Yes.
make comments thinking that you're part of their group, that you're, yeah, and you have to call them out on it because it's
Yes.
completely wrong and it's completely inappropriate.
Mm.
I find that really difficult.
It's horrible when something is said to you. Oh, I mean, it's just, it hits you here.
Yeah.
You've just reminded me, actually, I completely forgot about this. When I worked in London, and it really did hit me here. I think when it's said by an adult who should know better, I think children are learning. It's our job to teach them. But I was working in London at a recruitment consultancy, and my boss, one day, and again, because I don't look Chinese, they completely forget that I'm not that it is ever okay to say certain things, but
Yeah.
they think they're safe. And
Yes.
my boss did say, he approached someone sitting opposite me and said, "Oh, what are you eating today? Is it And then he used the slang word for Chinese and a
Yeah.
slang word for Japanese.
Yeah.
And I mean, my jaw hit the floor because I had never
Mm.
heard. I looked up at him and he looked back at me. It took a few seconds before his face drained of colour.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I had to take a second, and I did, because it wasn't said to me, but I was like, so I stood up and moved away to take a second to think about how to deal with it. And he came chasing after me. "Give me a hug, Ayla, give me a hug." I said, "No, no."
No, no, no.
I said, "No, I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to think about this." And I did. I made the decision that I was going to speak to the regional manager about it, but he got there first and explained what had happened, and I said that's fine. And I don't know what happened totally after that, but I mean, we weren't in the same team for very long.
Yeah.
He didn't get sacked or anything, but he got moved. And it's just, I just said again to the regional manager, it's just not okay. Like, this language is not okay.
And
So I
this
just
happened
need
in
him to
London.
know.
This is in London where it's so multicultural.
Exactly. I've had the worst thing I had said to me was during teaching, which I think I told you about, was in
Yeah.
my NQT year, when a little year 7 boy, completely unprovoked, I walked into his class and he knew. So my maiden name was Sarah, Sari, but it looked like Sari, as you know, and it was Turkish, but to the untrained, I guess, they assumed it was Indian or Pakistani. So this boy called me. I walked in and he said, "You dirty," and called me slang word for Chinese, slang word for Pakistani. And that was the first time I've ever had something said to me, and it hurt me. So again, I took a minute, because you learn as an adult, don't you, to take a second. So I did walk back in to speak to him and get him out of class, and he was the sort of child who just picked up his bags and went home. She screamed at me and went home. That was fine. But I think what disappointed me a tad was possibly the way the school dealt with it. It was I actually didn't cry for about half an hour. I held it together and then suddenly went into the staff room and broke down, because I'd never been made to feel quite like that before. So I took half a day and I went home and I did chat to my unions. I didn't want, again, it's education. But when I spoke to the deputy head, he said, "Well, this is a sort of language they use at home because their local rivals is a Chinese restaurant." And I just said,
like that.
"Not okay." I said,
"Oh my goodness."
I said, "Please do not say you're justifying this." "No, no, no, I'm not." I said, "Okay, he needs to." I said, "I don't want him to be flogged. I said, I want him to understand. I know he's lived in a bubble. I
Yeah,
know the language is used at home. Let's now break this cycle and
absolutely.
let him know that, if he said that, God forbid, in the wrong part of England, it's, bad news. I said, I'm trying to protect this child and
Yeah,
understand. It's been, I've been on this planet for 43 years, and those are the only occasions. And I think every
yeah,
mixed race person will have something at some point, won't they?
yeah,
It's just
absolutely.
how it's dealt with it.
Yeah,
It's how
but
it's dealt
the
with.
sad thing, Ayla, though, for me, is that that happened, what, 20 years ago, 21 years
Yeah.
ago?
Yeah.
I was in education until last year. I was in education
Oh.
for 20 years. And even as a head at my school, my last school, there was still language like that was being used because people at home were using it. This is 20 years after that incident with you.
Goodness
This
me.
language is still being used in some communities because
Yeah.
they don't know better. And so it's so important for schools and employers
Mm.
have a DEIA strategy, diversity, equity, inclusion, and
Mm.
accessibility
Mm.
strategy, policy, statement to make sure that people are very clear that
Mm.
any discriminatory language is not going to be tolerated. And these are
No.
why, these are all
Exactly.
characteristics.
Was it towards you?
Oh, to other kids as well. And yeah, and there I saw things on social media about my background and everything. It's just really, really uncalled for,
Goodness me.
inappropriate.
I
It's
had no idea. I think you mentioned it once, but I had
yeah.
no idea that it was social media and being said
Oh
to you.
gosh.
I really
Yeah,
didn't know
yeah.
that.
I mean, sometimes we would have calls on speakerphone
Mm.
with some more aggressive families, shall we say,
Mm.
just so that there were witnesses to hear the conversation and the language they
Mm.
would use to describe other children from different ethnic
Gosh.
backgrounds was just disgusting. So we would have to end the call and, we would have to put in the strategy of what we were going to do with that particular parent.
Mm.
But I'd like to say things have changed so much in the last 20
Mm.
years,
Mm.
but clearly there is still a heck of a lot more work that needs to be done because it's not just
Yeah.
towards children. And now into the mix, there's the whole social media element. 20
Mm.
years ago, there weren't really that many sort of smartphones with
Mm.
front-facing cameras and things like that.
Yeah.
Facebook and things, that was probably just starting
That
around
was
that time.
2007, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So, that incident with you, that would have happened pre 2007
Mm.
if you were an
Yeah.
educator. So we didn't even have Facebook and things like that.
That's a really good point.
What
That's
it's
a good
like
point.
now, where people think that they're safe behind a screen and they don't filter anything that they say. They just use a fake name on a profile, so people don't know who they are, and they can be just vile. Now, I don't
Gosh.
know what possesses somebody to do that, because I can
Mm.
think of a million better things to do with my time than to go around, bad mouthing people and things like that.
Yeah. Well, it's unhappiness, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it is. It is. Or maybe there's that feeling of threat. Oh, this person
Mm.
is
Yeah.
going to be threatening to me. You hear lots of things about, oh, these immigrants are taking our jobs, that sort of um
Yeah.
language.
Aren't we lucky though, in some ways? Because, you said that they were on speakerphone and using this language, and it, I have to remind myself that that is used frequently, because obviously I never heard anything derogatory said about any race in my household. Like, I never heard anything.
Yeah.
So to know that that still goes on, and I mean, my son, I've got as you know, I have a 10-year-old son. He's very inquisitive, and um, I really instill in the children. I think educating those children, I know it's difficult, and I've also obviously had to say to them, and you would like to think that your children will never make this mistake,
Yeah.
but I keep saying to them, you say something derogatory about someone, about their race, about their sexuality, anything online, that will be there
Yes, it will.
forever.
Exactly.
So,
And if your
you need
employer, when
to,
they're doing their checks on you,
what's that, sorry, when,
your future employer
oh yes,
on you, it's going to
yeah.
flag up.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just, I think it's just pockets, isn't it? Just tiny little pockets now
Yeah.
that unfortunately still, I don't know whether it's backwards, but just still hold on to certain beliefs, which is a bit sad, isn't
Need
it?
to come into the 21st century.
They do need to
Stay
come into
in 1950 or wherever it's come from. Anyway, so as we come to a close on the podcast, Ayla, what message would you like to go out there as a fellow mixed race person? What message?
I guess if there's the one that's springing to mind is if there's anyone that's possibly, I mean, young or old, there might be some people that are our age that are still struggling. Just love who you are. Yeah. Just love who you are. I just think mixes are amazing. Non-mixes, they're amazing. And I just think, what's that, sorry?
Mixies, that's what we are, mixies.
I think it's every mix, I find it fascinating, which is why I can see my art going in that way, because I love, very similar to my dad, I love meeting new people. You know, when you find out they're a bit this, you're like, oh, that's so cool. It's a celebration. I think that's my biggest message to people. It should be a celebration. It should be.
It absolutely is. I completely agree with you. It's a celebration. It's not something to be scared of or to be threatened by. And hey, let's just all be kind and appreciative of each other.
Exactly.
Wouldn't the world just be a better place if we were all
wouldn't it?
It would, if we were just positive and nice to each other. It doesn't matter what you look like, does it? It really doesn't matter. Just be nice. And guess
I was talking about that to my mate the other day.
Yeah, the other person will smile back to you as well. You know,
exactly, they will. And it costs nothing, but makes your health better.
Exactly. That's actually proven by research that if you're positive, you show gratitude and everything, it makes you feel better too. So all round, it's just so thank you so much, Ayla, for being on today.
Thank you for having me. It's been amazing. I love your podcast. I love it.
That's so lovely to hear.
I'm very proud of you.
Minutes went by so quickly. We'll have to do it again. So thank you so much. And the podcast is going to be available on YouTube, and I will be sending out the link on my social media. So thank you very much again, Ayla. Thank you to everyone who's listening. Bye.
Bye.